Okay, so we're going to pick up with part three because I kind of got disturbed at the end of part two and it ended quite quickly, but we're going to pick up where we left off. Okay, so we were talking about muscle tension relationship and measuring the force. You can see the force right here of a muscle fiber. Um, and I showed you twitch. You had the refractory period, and then twitch, and then it comes down. So this is kind of sort of on the same picture, but you need to look at it as differently. This is not a twitch going up like we showed you before. This is actually how much force in this one can be generated starting at a distance between the actin and the myosin. So here, let's start with optimal length. Notice in the optimal length, my myosin in the center is interacting, and here's my actin here, and I have this little space. So I have a space between the two ends of the actin fibers, and that would be your H zone, right? The optimal force, the greatest amount of force that can be generated is with that little bit of space between those two. If I shorten that space right here, and there's getting less and less to where there's none, notice how drastically the amount of force is going to be dropped off as those actin fibers get closer and closer together, and into which there's none, and then you're not going to get any force. So we have to start with a little bit of gap in here. Likewise, if I go too far, if the actin is barely on the ends of this myosin and there's not enough to come in contact and interact, it's going to have a harder time pulling in towards each other. So again, you see this decrease in the amount of force the further and further you pull that actin back. So the further back here, the less interaction it has with the myosin, the less force I'm going to get. So we really do have what's called optimal length, and that's just kind of the measurement of between that in that H zone. How much space can I have before I don't have enough force on either ends because of increasing or decreasing that space too much, that H zone too much. All right, now if I want to build more force, I told you one of the main ways to build more force is to bring in more than one muscle fiber. But you can also start kind of reducing the refractory. Remember our refractory. So here is one twitch, here's a second twitch, here's a third twitch, fourth, and so on. That's called a series. So this is a series of twitches. And in between each of those, you're going to have that refractory period. That's the amount of time it has to kind of recover. So if I let that twitch go all the way down to where it started at, my refractory period is all the way, we started here, we go back down. Then each twitch after that really can't increase in force. But in summation, here's summation. Here's my first twitch, and I start to go back down and start to relax. And here's that little refractory period. But if I don't let it go all the way down and I send some more information, you still have to have a little bit of refractory. You can't just like keep going straight up. Okay, but if you have a little bit of this space in here, and I reduce the length, see how I went all the way down and then had this longer refractory. But if I don't let it go all the way down and then I send another one, look at the peak. The peak goes a little bit higher. And then the next one that comes along, it goes a little bit higher. So I can actually increase force by sending those contractions a little bit closer together. Here's the problem. Tetany. Notice that I did summation here and it was nice. I got a big force, but then I eventually got it back down to a relaxation. Your muscles have to go down to that. In tetany or tetanic contraction, I increase force, but at some point, you're not increasing dramatically in between, and you're definitely not relaxing in between, and you're not giving yourself enough refractory, and it just won't relax. My force becomes one single contraction that can't stop, and that becomes a problem. There's no partial relaxation going on, and then there's no complete relaxation also in there, and your muscles won't be able to relax. That is an issue, and it's painful. All right, but if I want a lot of force, the other thing I can do, the best thing I can do, I can start sending those twitches a little bit closer together. That's always good. That works. But if I really want to generate a lot of force and not end up in something like tetany, then what I really want to do is just recruit a whole bunch of more motor neurons, and with them recruit a whole bunch of extra of muscle fibers in there. So the recruitment is having a whole bunch more neurons telling more muscle fibers, let's do some job here. So a lot of the muscle is being told what to do. Instead of just little fibers here and there, partial muscle being told to do something, we're gonna get a lot more of that muscle to do some work. And I mentioned this earlier, precise versus a lot of force. If I want a precise movement, I really don't want a lot of muscle fibers. I only want a few muscle fibers so I can get that precision of that movement, like moving your eye, that really small movement that goes from one spot very slightly to another spot, but allows you to make this good visual reference. You really don't want your eyes just like shifting all at once and then shifting, back and forth. You want them to move very slightly to the place that you're telling them to go to. All right. But if I do recruit a lot of motor units, I want to get a lot of force for that. So this is kind of like your back muscles. If I'm going to lift something, I'm going to pick up something with a lot of force, I need a lot of motor units and I need a lot of muscle fibers to be activated. But I'm really not doing a precise movement. I'm picking up something big. I'm just telling it to do a lot. Brute force, right? In that I is gentle force and gentle movement. Fewer muscles involved, fewer motor units involved. And that's how we do different things. So just, recruit more or less to do certain jobs. All right. When I want a sustained contraction, if I need my muscles to do work over a long period of time and not, do this relaxation and stuff, I need to lift something and move it, carry it and move it someplace. There is a way of doing this that makes this whole movement much smoother. First, you're going to start with your smaller muscle units or motor units, and they're going to recruit less muscle fibers. Okay, they get started first, and then that moves into the larger. So you kind of start small and move up, right? So then I recruit the larger motor units. I keep saying muscles, motor units that stimulate the muscles. That gives you a lot of force, but we don't go like from 0 to 100 all at once. We increase that accelerator by going from the smaller to the larger and make a smooth transition from nothing to this force that's in there. So that allows that smooth movement. Okay. And then I threw in another term right here, this term called muscle tone. And we think of muscle tone, like some people have really great muscle tone. You can see it. They've got a six pack. They've got all this going on in their state. They lift their arm and without even trying, they've got like muscles. They've got great muscle tone. But we all have a little bit of muscle tone. All of our muscles have to stay in this partial state of contraction. You can't relax your muscles completely, or they couldn't really go through the work that they need to go through. But the more you exercise, the better your muscle tone is going to be. So the more they're going to stay in this partial state of contraction. The less you exercise, they're just going to stop doing the work that's not being required of them, and your muscle tone gets more flaccid. That includes, like even being bedridden or sick or something, you're going to lose that muscle tone because you're not using those muscles. But we still do have a partial state, even in that sort of, really bedridden state. You're going to have some muscles that are in partial contraction. It's just not as well as somebody who's in good shape. All right, so types of contractions. That's our next topic right here. Types of contractions, these all refer to what we're doing with our muscles. And the first one is isotonic. Iso just means same. Okay, so isotonic, our muscle contracts, so you're getting contraction and you're changing the length. Okay, so I'm going to contract and there's going to be some sort of movement involved, usually because you're changing the length of that muscle. And if you're changing the length, it's going to be pulling against something. So like right here is the biceps. If this gets shorter, if this muscle gets shorter, then that bone right there is going to be pulled up. Okay, so you're going to change the length of that muscle. All right, so movement will be interacting with that. And then there's a couple different types that go along that are part of this isotonic. Eccentric is a lengthening contraction. So a lengthening contraction means that the muscle is going from a short position to a longer position, and that's going to extend out. Okay, so you're still contracting. You got to think about it when you change your arm. So if I take my biceps and I do a curl upwards, right? This muscle is going to get shorter, and it's doing most of the work. But you have another muscle right back here that is going to be providing resistance against that. It's going to be, as this one gets shorter, it's going to be lengthening, and it's providing resistance. But it doesn't mean it's completely relaxing. Even though the triceps are relaxing more than the biceps. The biceps are doing more of a contraction at this point. These guys are still in a contraction because they have to provide resistance against this. Otherwise, you'll go from this position all the way up to here in one movement. You know, there won't be this moving slowly to that position. And then again, when you reverse and go back down again, this one's going to start contracting and this one will start relaxing, but it's still contracting to a certain extent. It's just doing less work than this one at this point. So it's lengthening. So that lengthening contraction is providing resistance against the other one. We call these two working together. These are called opposing pairs. So one is doing a primary contraction and one's kind of relaxing, but it's not relaxing totally. It's still providing contraction resistance against the other one, opposing pairs, to allow for smooth movement. So concentric then is that shortening contraction. So when that moves up, this muscle gets shorter from here to here. That's a shortening contraction. Where when you move this back down, that was lengthening. That was eccentric. Isometric, again, here's that term iso. Iso means the same, but in this case, we are contracting our muscle, but we're not changing length. So this is something like, like a chin up. Not when you're chin upping, but once you get to that chin up position and you hold in place, that would be isometric. As you're getting to that point, you're pulling your body up. That would be the isotonic. You're pulling and shortening those muscles. But once you get there and you hold in place, that's isometric. This is yoga. Yoga is all about getting into a position and holding that position. So different yoga positions have you contract muscles, hold those positions. Those are isometric. And it is a lot more work than you would think it would be if you've never done yoga. All right, slow twitch, fast twitch fibers, okay? We have degrees in between, so nothing's ever like all or none. But we do have what we call slow twitch fibers, and these are also called type 1 fibers. They're oxidative, meaning that they use a lot of oxygen for production, and they use a lot of ATP. Okay, so the oxygen's producing a lot of ATP. These guys do not get tired as easily as other muscle types. I shouldn't say very easily, but as easily as other muscle types. So they're much more resistant to fatigue. They have a lot of myoglobin. Remember, myoglobin stores that O2, so they have the oxygen that's available to allow them to produce ATP and to resist that fatigue. So they're getting a lot of good blood supply and they're getting a lot of good oxygen. These guys can do work for a long period of time. A good example of this is the chicken leg. We have raised chickens to be basically big breasts. They're not like other birds. A lot of birds fly a lot. So their breast muscles their breast muscles are much more like this. They're slow twitch fibers. Chickens don't. Chickens stand all day. They stand on their legs all day. They rarely fly. If you spook them, they'll fly, but they do that little run and hop. So they fly, flutter, and then they're down on the ground again really quickly because their breast muscles cannot handle that amount of energy. But their legs, they stand all day. They need a rich blood supply and they need energy flowing to those legs because they have a lot of that. So this is that rich myoglobin. This is what we call dark meat because of the myoglobin. And it allows them to stand without getting tired for very long. Genetically, in chickens, we've bred them to be like this, but also we can find that it also applies to humans, and you can see it in people too. Some people genetically are more prone to having these slow twitch fibers, and some are more prone to having fast twitch fibers. So when you look at, like really good athletes, not the rest of us that are somewhere in between these guys, but like way in between, way lower, whatever. These guys at their peak, you've got a marathon runner here, and you've got this guy that's a sprinter. Okay. So genetically, they have, you know, been born to sort of be better at one type of sport or another. So they do have this predisposition. That is not to say that there isn't a lot to do with training. Training is huge, but you have some people, it's like no matter how much I exercise, I'm not ever going to be as good as either one of those. They're genetically, they were blessed in that area. Training also put them over the edge. But the marathon runners, these guys run for really, really long distances. So marathon runners genetically tend to be prone to having a higher amount of these slow twitch fibers than somebody who's like a sprinter would be. They just born that way. And then I always call like junior high is the natural selection for sports, I think, because you get to junior high and all the coaches start looking at these kids. Every kid wants to try out for every sport, or almost every kid does. And they go out, and the tall kids get recruited for basketball, the fast kids get recruited for track and football and stuff like that. And they start, the coaches start hunting them down. And if you're sort of mediocre and you're short and you want to play basketball, you're probably going to self-select out of that sport because you're just not going to be as successful as the other kids, and you go find something else to do. That's part of that genetic predisposition. Are you predisposed to being good at this one thing? If not, you're probably going to go find something else to do. If so, you're going to be encouraged and you're going to train better at being that one thing, better at that thing that you were already had a little bit more genetic predisposition for. All right, so marathon runners genetically, like I said, tend to have more of these slow twitch fibers than the majority of the rest of us. Fast twitch, so they twitch, they have this real quick twitch rate, right? But are fatigue resistant, are what we call type 2A. So they're not quite just type 2 by themselves or type 2A. They are intermediate. They're not the slow twitch, and they're not really the fastest fast twitch fibers. They're sort of in between. They are oxidative, so they are using oxygen, they are producing ATP, and they do have myoglobin. They just don't have as much myoglobin as the slow twitch guys. So they'd still, even with this myoglobin, oxygen, they're still going to have a darker color. They have a pink to red color. They just don't have that really dark color. They're also resistant to fatigue. They're just not as resistant as the slow twitch fibers. Okay. And then the last group is this type 2B. These are what we call the real fast twitch fibers. These have very little myoglobin, so they're not storing oxygen. They don't really have a good blood supply. They are really susceptible to fatigue, so they're going to tire out really quickly. They cannot have this long-term endurance like a marathon, but their advantage is they contract really rapidly. So when the energy is there, when the force is there, they go from 0 to 100 in a very short time, whereas the slow twitch is going to take a little bit longer to get there, right? They can get there, but they can sustain a lot longer. These guys use that energy and then plummet really fast, but they're really good. So when we talk about it, as far as back to our chicken example, that chicken breast that we've bred is that white meat, right? So white meat, very little myoglobin. These are the white fibers. I mean, that really is a white fiber. So not a lot of white, a lot of stored energy in the form of that oxygen and the myoglobin. But that chicken can do a quick burst of energy. It can flutter away, but then it has to land pretty quickly. Okay. And in humans, this would be our sprinters. These guys and women and athletes go from, standing still at that starting point to they finish the race in no time flat, but they cannot maintain. They cannot keep going for longer periods of time like a marathon runner. They use up their energy very quickly. All right. All right. Use and disuse. We all know about atrophy. If you're bedridden for a long time, your muscles are going to get smaller and less able to use them, and you're going to have to go through therapy to bring that back. But there's also something called hypertrophy. Hyper means above. Hyper means high. So hypertrophy is forcefully exercised, very enlarged muscles, and you see the very defined muscles. And this is Arnold Schwarzenegger in his younger days when he was Mr. Universe. Atrophy is the opposite. A means without, or it means no, or not. So this means not trophic. Okay, these are unused muscles. They've decreased in size. You haven't really lost the muscle fibers. You just decreased their size. That's the key there. So you can bring them, you can start working them back into a larger shape. But these are the two extremes: too much or a whole bunch, and too little or a lot less. Hypertrophy and atrophy or atrophy. All right, smooth muscle. Smooth muscle contracts too. Remember that the difference is it doesn't have the sarcomeres and stuff. So compared to skeletal muscle, these guys are shorter. They're that sort of tapered edge that I was showing you, single nucleated, only one nucleus, and then the tapered ends there. They still have the ability to contract. They do so involuntarily. This is not something that you control with. And they're going to have some differences in how they contract. All right. We'd still have the myofilaments, but instead of that very defined, organization where you have the actin and you have the myosin and this sarcomere in this organization, they really don't have that organization. They have those fibers, they just don't have that real structured organization that you have in there. And so because they don't have these Z lines going on either in that structure, they don't have any striations. So we can't see the striations when you look at the pictures of them. They don't have the T tubules. So there's no T tubules that you find in skeletal muscle. And the same with the SR, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's not well developed either. And remember, this is where the calcium is. Just because they're not well developed and they don't have this one in particular, the T tubule, doesn't mean they don't have calcium. They still need calcium and they still use calcium. All right, types. Visceral means organs. So visceral smooth muscle refers to like our digestive system, so the GI tract, right? So here's the esophagus, here's the stomach down in here. When food hits these muscles and causes them to expand, it causes this rhythmic pulsing of the muscles. So they contract, they relax, they contract, relax. And when they do, they just generally push that food down until it reaches the stomach. And even the stomach, you're probably very familiar with peristalsis in the stomach. When we go through peristalsis in the stomach, you don't have food in there. That's that gurgling sound you get. Your stomach is growling at you. That's peristalsis of the stomach. The stomach is saying, hey, I'm expecting food at this time. I'm going to go through all those little contractions because that's going to break up the food. So it starts moving around and doing all of that because it's expecting to receive that food. We can train our stomach to know when food's coming or not. All right, they do have single units of smooth muscles. It's basically these sheets that work together in that rhythmic pulsing of that pushing, I guess, of that food and that water that goes in there. Gap junctions hold them together. Peristalsis is that movement of smooth muscle that I was talking about that pushes things down. And our hollow organs have these, and hollow means there's space in there like the stomach. Okay. Multi-unit smooth muscle, again, not very organized, so they're less organized than skeletal muscle. They function as separate little units instead of one unit. You don't get that peristalsis, that movement that reacts together. So each fiber kind of functions separately. We find those you've got the eye right here. So the iris is this colored portion of your eye, and it regulates this little spot right here. That spot in the middle is called the pupil. And the pupil is just a hole in the eye. So there's nothing really there. The only thing that goes through it is light. So light goes through there. If I want more light to go through, like in the dark, these muscles in the iris contract and they make that hole larger. When the light's on, they're going to, well, actually, it depends on what they are. So these here contract, these relax, so they work opposite. If I want that hole to get smaller because there's a lot of light, these round cervical muscles right here contract, and then these long ones that go this way relax, and that causes that hole to get smaller and less light is sent in. But that's all a multi-unit smooth muscle. You also have some in the arteries, the walls of the arteries. Every time your heart contracts, you get a rush of blood through the center. So you have to have the ability for this muscle, the artery to kind of give a little bit and to expand to accept that flow of blood. And we can feel that with a pulse rate. So when you feel that, it's the blood flowing through is the pulse rate. That's the heart pumping, and then the walls of the arteries kind of giving for that to allow that blood to flow through. All right. So how does smooth muscle contraction differ from the skeletal muscle contraction? Still myosin and actin. So we still have the myosin and actin. So those are still interacting. But remember, I just said that it's less organized. So you don't have those contracting units of actin and myosin working together in that very organized structure. But you still have myosin and you have the actin that's going to be pulling across it, but they're acting in a much smaller scale and individually in those cells. We still use calcium. Calcium still has to tell that myosin and actin to interact. You still have to have an energy source, so ATP is going to be there too. But it's more of a membrane impulse instead of a nerve impulse that's going to tell it what to do. So, like with your GI tract, it's not the brain saying, hey, do that. Partially, yes, it is. I mean, your brain does some of this. But really, when the food hits that area, so say the food hits that area and this area stretches a little bit, that's what tells it. The cell says, hey, I need to react. So it's on the cellular level that's saying, hey, it's time to contract, relax, to get that food and that water to go through there. So different in ways that it's different. Doesn't have the troponin. Remember, that's where the calcium bound in skeletal muscle. So it doesn't have troponin, but it has something similar. So calcium instead binds to this protein called calmodulin. So it's a different protein that takes the place of it. We have, instead of just acetylcholine, we have two neurotransmitters that are affecting smooth muscle. Acetylcholine is still one of those. So if you're going to remember one, remember acetylcholine. It's always there. Norepinephrine is the other one that works on it. So instead of just one, we've got the two here. Hormones are going to have more of an effect on smooth muscle. Stretching, remember, as the food passes through, the stretching triggers the contraction. Smooth muscle is much slower to contract and slower to relax. It's much more rhythmic than you would see rhythmic than you would see in the skeletal muscle. You remember that term peristalsis? So it doesn't really have to react that fast. It's not like you have to respond to something that's coming up to you like your skeletal muscle and maybe run away and react really quickly. You just kind of have to get that food through. So it really doesn't have to contract really quickly or relax really quickly. It just has to do its job and get there sooner or later. All right. But because of this, because it's slower, it is more resistant to fatigue. Remember the slow twitch fibers? This is like, the epitome of that. And it can also change length without changing tautness on it, unlike the skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is only found one place. It's found in the heart. It does have striations, so we do see striations here. So you do have that more organized structure of that muscle fiber in there. Remember, we have intercalated discs that divide the muscle fibers. You see also this branching that's going on in here, much more branched fashion. Here's a little intercalated disc right there. So a little intercalated disc branching. They're working as a unit. So those little networks of fibers do work as a unit, and it's very rhythmic and it's very steady. Your heart starts and it transmits that pulse down those fibers, and the lub dub. So your atria receive the blood, they put it down into the ventricles, and the ventricles pump, and it's like this wave of action that comes across that muscle. So you do really have this whole standardized rhythm, and they work together and have this spacing that is in their contractions that allow for reception of blood and then pumping of blood without it all trying to receive and pump all at the same time. They are self-exciting, which means that the muscle fibers have a little of their own control over themselves. And there's this longer refractory period than skeletal muscle. It has to work all the time. You can't stop and take a break, right? So it does need this refractory period. But again, that's this lub dub, lub dub. You have this space where it kind of stops and relaxes and allows for the next action to occur. This is just general characteristics sort of all put together in here so you can review that when you're studying. All right, skeletal muscle actions. We have a lot of body movements. We talked about this with joints, and it's going to come back because the muscle is obviously attached to the bones, and at the point of a joint, this is going to cause movement to occur. So we need to look at that association in there and pull that all together in there. And remember, shortening, that's flexing, lengthening here, I guess going back out this way, lengthening is an extension, but you do have to have the muscle where it attaches to a bone that doesn't move and it attaches to the bone that's going to do the movement. So the, I thought I had that on there. Do not, I'm going too far. The insertion and the origin, I think that's on the next page. Insertion and origin on there. All right, so when the muscles work with a bone, the bone is the part, what we call these levers. So it's acting like a lever, like anything like in that we would use as a tool is to lift something like a wheelbarrow here or even your scissors. These are based off of a physics called levers. So are your muscles and your bones, okay? So one part of it has to be a rigid bar, and that's your bones. The fulcrum is the point where the bar moves. So this is our joint. So where is our movement going to occur? Here on the wheelbarrow, it's right here. You've got the fulcrum right here. So if I push this up, this is the point at which it's moving. That's your fulcrum, okay? The object is what's providing the resistance to it. So like here is the object, here it's our resistance. All right, so what am I working on? Okay, is your resistance. And the force is the amount of energy that's put in there. So if I lift my wheelbarrow, I put my hands right here and I produce an upward force. If I'm using the scissors to cut, I'm providing my own force here, and then that force is transmitted to that object, okay? It's just how a lever system works, and that's how your body works too. Remember that the muscles do work in opposing pairs. You can't have one totally contract and one totally relax, or you would go from this position with the hand right on your shoulder all at once. You need to have this controlled movement. So as the biceps here contract to decrease that angle here and make the hand come towards the arm, this muscle, the triceps, is relaxing, it's lengthening, but it's still in a contraction mode because it's providing resistance against the primary mover on there. So flexors and extensors are those opposing pairs that work together to provide smooth movements. Okay, there it is. I knew I had it on here. Origin and insertion, we talked about that with joints. The origin is the place where the muscle attaches on the bone that doesn't move. The insertion is the place where the muscle attaches on the bone, and it's this bone right here that is going to move and actually do a change in action. The bone doesn't, the joint does. So this angle right here of this joint is the thing that changes. And in a flexing, that angle gets smaller. When you extend out at this joint, so I extend right here at this joint right here, then this angle is going to increase here. It increases, that's an extension. But it's always this bone right here in this case that moves. If I want to move my humerus up here, then I'm going to have a different set of muscles that pull on that bone and pull it up. Okay, so the biceps are only pulling on one thing. They're only doing one job. And by the way, that's another point in there. Muscles can only pull, right? They cannot push on something. So that becomes a really big issue. If I want to flex, then my biceps get shorter and they pull on this bone to make it go that way. But if I want to take that bone and move it back out again and increase that distance and move that arm, make that arm straight, this muscle right here, these biceps cannot push on that bone to pull it out. It's going to be that triceps that then pulls from this direction to pull that bone down. Okay, so muscles can only pull. They can resist each other and create this force, but they themselves only do work, or they only are able to pull on a bone, not push on it. All right, so how are they working? Bunch of muscles all working together. It's not just your biceps working to make your arm, raise your hand up. It's going to be your biceps, your triceps, and all kinds of other muscles in there that are sort of holding everything in place. Our prime mover is the one we really think about. So if you're working out and you're trying to work a muscle group, that's the one you're really generally thinking. So if I'm taking weights and I'm pulling them up, that's my prime mover is pulling up. But if I'm taking those weights and I'm trying to work my triceps, then I'm going to be doing an extension movement, and then that would be my prime mover. So which one is working at the time? It's also known as your agonist. So your prime mover and your agonist are the exact same thing. All right, same, different term, same thing. This is the guy that's primarily responsible for the movement. Then you're going to have helpers. Okay. We're going to have a synergist. A synergist is any muscle that helps by holding everything else into place. As I move my arm up, where's my picture? As I move my arm up, right, I really don't want those joints flopping around. I don't want my arm falling out of place. I'm going to have other muscles and other structures that bind and hold things into place so that this guy can actually do his job correctly. The antagonist is the guy that works opposite. So if I'm using my biceps to flex my arm, my triceps are the antagonist in that movement. They're resisting that movement, but that's allowing for a smooth action. So they're resisting moving in causing an opposite action to occur. Okay. And then fixators are another thing, like a synergist. They're going to hold and bind things into place so that you don't just, your joints don't slip out of place and your bones don't move into another position. All right, eye muscles. This is one of those things you're going to go over in lab, but there's a whole bunch of them. There's more than you really need to know. You just need to know 6. Eye muscles, guys, are one of the easiest ones you're ever going to know. They're either an oblique, or they're a rectus, and then they're all named by where their position is. So superior is above. So here's my eye. Superior, the muscle's above. The rectus comes across and goes straight into that eye. The oblique, the superior oblique, hits the eye and comes in at an angle. So when I move my eyes, right, I can look up, I can look down, I can look side to side, but I can also look at angles, and I can also turn my eyes around in circles. That's what these obliques help to do. So they help to make those other angles. The superior rectus just kind of raises, right? By itself would raise. The superior oblique is going to allow for it to go at an angle for that. And then those working together allow all kinds of different angles. Right and left movement would be these rectus muscles on the side. The one towards the nose is the medial rectus. The one towards the outer portion of your face would be the lateral rectus. And then again, on the bottom, I have an inferior rectus that moves the eye down, and then one that goes at an angle across here, the inferior oblique, that again moves the eyes at different angles. And then you have some others, but those are the ones we really want to know about. Those are the ones you're going to learn about in lab that are mainly, these are the ones that are actually attached to the eyeball and working the eyeball's movements. Notice how few they are. Remember we talked about that? Precise movements, fewer muscles. There aren't that many that create such a wide range of motion in your eyes because you really don't want to overdo it. You just want these precise small movements. Some of y'all are probably familiar with this. TMJ syndrome. Remember our joint that we talked about? Temporal mandibular joint. TMJ syndrome is when that joint that's right there at the mandible is irritated, and it's irritated because you're doing things like grinding your teeth at night And when you do that, you're taking these muscles that are attached right here and you're constantly contracting them. So you can see the muscles in here, but also these muscles around here. They're constantly contracted, and you're probably doing it while you sleep and when you're not really paying attention to it. And what that does is it just causes this cascade of contractions and muscles across your body. So your neck starts to get tight, your jaw muscles get tight, you're clenching, so your teeth are grinding together. So you end up with facial pain from all of those tense muscles, headache from those tense muscles that then extends down your back, ringing in the ears. Again, this goes back to tense muscles. Clicking of the jaw. If you can take your jaw and you move your jaw and you hear that click sound, that's what the clicking is. So that's one indication that you might be moving in the direction of TMJ. You might want to start thinking about, wearing teeth guards or something at night to keep the tension low. Insomnia from pain and from grinding of the teeth. Your teeth are going to be grinding a lot, so there's going to be damage to the teeth. So that's going to lead to sensitivity to heat and cold, backache, because once again, these muscles, and then you're going to get the muscles down the back, and it just sort of, radiates and extends out. So you've got backache, dizziness, pain in front of the ears, muscles. Again, it all goes back to the muscles. You've got a misaligned jaw. That's that clicking of the jaw and the cracking. You got grinding teeth going on. So that's all causing tension and contraction of these muscles, and too much and over contraction, and at times when they shouldn't be, like when you're sleeping, and that's going to put all of this pain back on there. The nerves get affected, and it can get worse and worse and worse. Some people it's minor, some people it's really, really bad. If you first start noticing something like that, try relaxation, massage, something to relieve the tension in those muscles. An orthodontic device, and you can buy these at Walgreens and CVS and stuff, where it's a bite guard. You put it in your mouth. So if you do grind at night, basically you're putting pressure on a soft pad, and it's not putting the pressure back on those muscles and those teeth, and it allows you to have less tension that's going on in there. If it really, really gets bad, then at the worst extreme, they're talking surgery, but that's something that they want to avoid if we can sort of relieve all of this through other methods. As we get old, your muscles are no different. They start to go downhill just like everything else. So the myoglobin that stores the oxygen decreases, creatine phosphate and ATP, which are your energy sources, they decrease. So you're declining in all of that. So you're going to have less ability to move those muscles and use those muscles. By 80, you've lost about half of your muscle mass, and that's kind of depressing. So that's something to consider if you want to maintain your strength and everything. And because you see people with their hunchbacks and they're walking around with canes and walkers. Some of that's injury, a lot of that's injury, but it's also due to reduction in muscle mass and the inability just to hold their bodies up. So, exercise will ward that off a little bit. So always consider exercise at a young age and get into those habits. Your adipose or fat cells and connective tissue start to replace the muscle tissue. So you're losing muscle tissue and replacing them with other less useful, in this case, types of cells. So again, exercise always tells your body, hey, I need more of this. I need to strengthen this. And so if you start a good exercise program when you're young and maintain it through your older years, you're going to have this less of this decline that you would see in people that do less to prevent the decline of the muscles. And that'll be it. So we're done with chapter 9. I hope you guys all have a good evening or a good day. I will talk to you on the next PowerPoint. Goodbye.